The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek. It was the kind of place where lawns were meticulously manicured, flower beds burst with vibrant blooms, and white picket fences lined each property like a picture-perfect postcard. Children played tag on cul-de-sacs while parents chatted amiably over lemonade on front porches. Everything about Willow Creek screamed order, perfection, and control. At least that's how Karen Thompson saw it. Karen prided herself on being the unofficial guardian of her street, a self-appointed enforcer of its pristine image. Dressed in designer yoga pants and oversized sunglasses, she patrolled her driveway with military precision, ensuring no leaf was out of place, no car parked too long, and certainly no undesirables lingering nearby. To Karen, maintaining the aesthetic harmony of Willow Creek wasn't just a preference, it was a moral imperative. But today, something, or rather someone, threatened to disrupt her carefully curated paradise. Entered Jim Carter. Seated on a weathered wooden bench near the entrance to Willow Park, James Jim Carter leaned back against the cool metal frame, savoring the simplicity of a peanut butter sandwich. At 52, Jim had seen more hardship than most people could imagine. Years spent serving multiple tours overseas as a U.S. Army medic had left him physically scared and emotionally weary. When he returned home, life hadn't been kind. Unable to find steady work or reconnect with loved ones estranged by time and trauma, Jim eventually found himself living on the streets. Despite his circumstances, Jim carried himself with quiet dignity. His worn jacket bore patches commemorating his service, though they were faded from countless washes in public restrooms. A scruffy beard framed his weathered face, but his eyes, deep brown and filled with resilience, told the story of a man who refused to give up, even when the world seemed determined to break him. Today, Jim had decided to pay forward some kindness. After scavenging scraps for lunch, he'd spent hours wandering through Willow Park, picking up litter and tidying areas neglected by visitors. Holding a bulging trash bag stuffed with wrappers, bottles, and cigarette butts, he felt a flicker of pride. For once, he wasn't just surviving, he was contributing. As he settled onto the bench to rest, Jim allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The park was serene, its trees swaying gently in the breeze, birds chirping melodiously overhead. He didn't notice the scrutinizing gaze fixed on him from across the street. Karen's judgment. Karen stood on her porch, gripping a glass of iced tea so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her hawk-like eyes zeroed in on the figure sitting on the bench, taking in every detail with growing disdain. "What is he doing here?" she muttered under her breath, her lip curling in disgust. To Karen, Jim represented everything she despised: disorder, unpredictability, and an affront to her vision of perfection. His disheveled appearance, the tattered jacket, the unkempt hair, the scuffed boots, was bad enough. But what truly set her off was his race. In Karen's narrow worldview, anyone who didn't fit the mold of Willow Creek resident was automatically suspect. She watched as Jim unwrapped his sandwich and began eating slowly, occasionally glancing around at the park. To her, his mere presence was an intrusion, an act of defiance against the rules she believed governed this sacred space. Never mind that he wasn't causing trouble or disturbing anyone. Never mind that he had spent hours improving the very area she claimed to cherish. All Karen saw was a threat. The decision to act. Fuming, Karen marched back inside her house, slamming the door behind her. She paced the living room, muttering indignantly about people like that ruining neighborhoods. Her mind raced with scenarios. What if he started begging passersby for money? What if he vandalized property? What if children wandered too close and got hurt? Each imagined scenario fueled her paranoia until she convinced herself action was necessary. Grabbing her phone, she dialed 911 without hesitation. "Yes, hello," Karen said sharply, her voice dripping with urgency. "I'd like to report a suspicious individual loitering in Willow Park. He looked homeless, and honestly, I'm concerned for my safety and the safety of others." The dispatcher asked routine follow-up questions, but Karen cut them short. "Look, I don't know what he's doing here, but he doesn't belong. Can you send someone right away?" Satisfied that help was on the way, Karen stepped back outside to monitor the situation. From her perch on the porch, she kept a close eye on Jim, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Every bite of his sandwich, every shift in his posture, only reinforced her conviction that she was doing the right thing. Foreshadowing conflict. Unaware of Karen's actions, Jim finished his meal and stretched his legs, standing briefly to stretch before returning to the bench. As he sat down again, he noticed a young boy playing nearby drop a toy car into the grass. Without hesitation, Jim retrieved it and handed it back with a warm smile. "Thanks, mister," the boy chirped, running off to rejoin his friends. Jim chuckled softly, feeling a pang of nostalgia. Moments like these reminded him of why he joined the military in the first place: to protect people, to make a difference. If only more folks understood that everyone has value, regardless of outward appearances. Little did Jim know his simple act of kindness would soon be overshadowed by Karen's prejudice. Across the street, Karen seethed at the interaction, interpreting Jim's gesture not as altruism but as manipulation, a tactic to win favor and gain access to vulnerable targets. "It's always the same," she grumbled to herself. "They prey on innocence." Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant wail of sirens. Squinting down the road, she spotted two patrol cars pulling into the park parking lot. Officers Ramirez and Hayes emerged, their uniforms crisp and professional as they scanned the area. Karen straightened, a smug grin spreading across her face. Finally, she whispered triumphantly, "Let's see how long he lasts now." The calm before the storm. As the officers approached the bench, Jim looked up, surprised but calm. He set aside his trash bag and stood respectfully, meeting their gazes with steady confidence. "Evan, officers," he greeted them warmly, tipping an imaginary hat. "Everything okay?" Officer Ramirez nodded politely. "Sir, we received a report about a possible disturbance. Do you mind telling us what you're doing here?" Jim gestured toward the trash bag at his feet. "Just cleaning up a bit. Thought I'd do my part to keep things nice." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, but Karen hovered nearby, eager to interject. "That's ridiculous," she exclaimed, striding forward dramatically. "He's lying. He was loitering and acting suspiciously." Jim's expression darkened slightly, but he remained composed. The officers exchanged a glance, sensing the tension brewing between the two individuals. Whatever was happening here went beyond a simple misunderstanding. It was personal. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Willow Park, the stage was set for a clash of perspectives, prejudices, and principles. The air in Willow Park grew thick with tension as officers Ramirez and Hayes approached Jim, their presence commanding yet respectful. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. But the peaceful ambience of the park was shattered by Karen's shrill voice cutting through the quiet. "That's him," she declared, pointing an accusatory finger at Jim. "He's been loitering here for hours, making everyone uncomfortable. I demand you remove him immediately." Jim stood silently beside the bench, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. His posture was relaxed, almost serene, despite the hostility directed at him. He glanced briefly at Karen, his expression unreadable, before turning his attention back to the officers. Officer Ramirez, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward. "Sir, can you tell us what you're doing here?" she asked, her tone neutral but firm. "Of course," Jim replied calmly. He gestured toward the bulging trash bag resting near his feet. "I've been cleaning up the park, picking up litter, tidying things up. Just trying to help out." Karen scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. That's such a convenient excuse. You expect us to believe you're some kind of good Samaritan." Ignoring her outburst, Officer Hayes, a younger man with a warm smile and a knack for diffusing tense situations, crouched down to inspect the trash bag. Pulling it open slightly, he peered inside and whistled softly. "Looks like you've done quite a bit of work here, sir. This is impressive." Jim shrugged modestly. "It's not much, but every little bit helps. Thought it'd be nice to give something back." Karen bristled at the compliment, her face reddening with indignation. "You're seriously falling for this act? He's clearly just trying to manipulate you." Officer Ramirez turned to Karen, her gaze steady but piercing. "Ma'am, we're conducting an investigation. Please let us handle this professionally." Her words only fueled Karen's frustration. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, glaring daggers at both the officers and Jim. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when he turns out to be trouble." Verification and suspicion. Determined to verify Jim's story, Officer Hayes continued asking questions. "Do you live around here, sir, or are you passing through?" Jim hesitated for a moment, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "No, I don't live nearby. I've been staying wherever I can. Been tough since I got back from overseas." At the mention of military service, both officers straightened slightly, their expressions softening. Officer Ramirez reached into her utility belt and pulled out a small notebook. Mind if I see some ID, sir? Just standard procedure. Jim nodded understandingly and began rummaging through the pockets of his jacket. After a few seconds, he produced a worn leather wallet, extracting a faded military ID card. As he handed it to Officer Ramirez, she examined it closely, her brow furrowing in concentration. "This says you served in the U.S. Army," she said, glancing up at him. "Medic, multiple tours. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Jim confirmed, his voice tinged with pride despite the weight of his circumstances. "Did my time, tried to do right by my country. Now I'm just trying to get back on my feet." Officer Hayes exchanged a meaningful look with his partner. Both had family members who had served, and they couldn't help but feel a pang of respect and sadness for the man standing before them. It wasn't uncommon for veterans to struggle after returning home, but seeing it firsthand always hit hard. Meanwhile, Karen fumed silently, growing increasingly agitated as the officer's skepticism waned. She couldn't believe they were buying into Jim's story. To her, he was nothing more than a homeless man trespassing on her perfect street. Her prejudice blinded her to the truth that Jim was exactly who he claimed to be, a veteran doing his best to contribute, even when life had dealt him a bad hand. Karen's escalation. Unable to contain herself any longer, Karen interjected sharply. "Are you really going to take his word for it? Look at him. He's dirty, disheveled, and clearly up to no good. Why are you wasting your time listening to him?" Officer Ramirez fixed Karen with a stern glare, her patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, unless you have concrete evidence to support your claims, I suggest you step back and allow us to do our job." "I do have evidence," Karen snapped, throwing up her hands in exasperation. "My eyewitness account should be enough. You're supposed to protect neighborhoods like this, not coddle criminals." Her choice of words hung heavily in the air, drawing a collective intake of breath from the small crowd that had begun to gather. Neighbors, curious about the commotion, had wandered over to observe the scene. Some whispered among themselves, visibly uncomfortable with Karen's behavior, while others shot sympathetic glances at Jim. Jim remained unfazed, his composure unwavering. He knew better than to engage with someone like Karen. Arguing would only escalate the situation further. Instead, he focused on the officers, trusting them to handle things fairly. A shift in dynamics. As the confrontation unfolded, Officer Hayes took a step closer to Jim, his body language deliberately non-threatening. "Sir, I appreciate what you've done here today, cleaning up the park. It's a selfless act, especially given everything you've been through." Jim offered a faint smile, touched by the officer's acknowledgement. "Thanks. Means a lot to hear that." Officer Ramirez nodded in agreement, tucking Jim's ID back into her notebook. "We'll make sure this gets documented properly. In the meantime, is there anything we can do to assist you? Resources for veterans, housing options, anything like that?" Before Jim could respond, Karen erupted once again. "Are you kidding me? You're rewarding him for breaking the rules? This is outrageous." Her outburst drew murmurs of disapproval from the onlookers. One elderly woman shook her head in disgust, muttering under her breath, "What a disgraceful display." Even the other neighbors, who initially might have shared Karen's concerns about a stranger in the park, now seemed to side with Jim. They recognized the absurdity of her accusations and admired the quiet dignity with which Jim carried himself. Foreshadowing justice. Realizing she was losing ground, Karen made one final attempt to sway the officers. "If you won't arrest him, then at least issue a warning or escort him off the premises. He doesn't belong here." Officer Hayes turned to her, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, Mr. Carter hasn't broken any laws. He's contributed positively to the community today, and we commend him for that. If anything, it's your behavior that warrants scrutiny." The rebuke struck Karen like a slap across the face. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes, though she quickly masked it with defiance. "Fine, do what you want. But don't come crying to me when he causes problems later." With that, she stormed off, stomping back toward her house. Though she retreated physically, her venomous energy lingered, casting a shadow over the otherwise peaceful evening. A moment of humanity. Once Karen was out of earshot, Officer Ramirez turned to Jim with a warm smile. "Thank you for your service, sir. Truly. And thank you for taking care of this park. It looks fantastic." Jim chuckled softly, scratching the back of his neck. "Just glad I could help. Feels good to do something useful for a change." Officer Hayes gestured toward their patrol car. "Come with us, sir. We'd like to connect you with some resources that might make life a little easier moving forward. You've earned it." For the first time in what felt like ages, Jim allowed himself a glimmer of hope. As he followed the officers to their vehicle, he glanced briefly at the trash bag he'd left behind. It was a small gesture, but it had sparked something bigger, a reminder that even in the darkest times, acts of kindness could shine brightly. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the stage was set for justice to prevail, not just for Jim, but for the values of compassion, fairness, and respect that define true community spirit. As Officer Hayes opened the passenger side door of the patrol car for Jim, the weight of the moment settled over Willow Park like a heavy curtain. The golden hues of sunset gave way to deep purples and blues, signaling the end of another day. But this evening would be far from ordinary. What had begun as a prejudiced accusation was transforming into something much larger, a reckoning of values, biases, and humanity. Karen stood frozen on her porch, watching the scene unfold with mounting disbelief. Her carefully constructed narrative, that Jim was a dangerous loiterer unworthy of sympathy, was crumbling before her eyes. Worse still, the officers were treating him not as a suspect, but as a respected individual whose service deserved recognition. For someone accustomed to wielding control, this reversal was intolerable. Honoring sacrifice. Inside the patrol car, Jim sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees. Though he appreciated the officer's kindness, he couldn't shake the lingering sting of judgment from earlier. He'd faced prejudice countless times since becoming homeless, but Karen's venomous words had cut deeper than most. They reminded him of all the battles he fought, not just overseas, but at home against ignorance and indifference. Officer Ramirez broke the silence, her voice warm yet deliberate. Sir, we can't thank you enough for your service. Veterans like you are the backbone of this country. It's shameful how often people overlook that. Jim nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the dashboard. I don't do it for thanks, he said softly. I did my duty because it was the right thing to do. But sometimes, it feels like nobody cares anymore. His words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Officer Hayes exchanged a glance with his partner, both acutely aware of the systemic failures that left too many veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. Housing shortages, mental health challenges, and societal stigma compounded the difficulties faced by those who had sacrificed so much. We care, Hayes assured him firmly, and we're going to make sure you get the support you need. There are organizations dedicated to helping veterans like you, providing shelter, job training, counseling. You won't have to go through this alone. For the first time in months, Jim felt a flicker of hope. These strangers, bound by their badges and sense of justice, were offering him more compassion than he'd received from anyone else in recent memory. It wasn't charity, it was acknowledgement. Recognition of his worth as a human being, beyond the labels society had pinned on him. Confronting prejudice. Meanwhile, Karen paced furiously on her porch, muttering under her breath about reverse psychology and bias against homeowners. She couldn't fathom why the officers hadn't arrested Jim, or at the very least escorted him off the premises. To her, his presence remained an affront to everything she held dear: order, cleanliness, and exclusivity. Her rant was interrupted when Officer Ramirez approached her expression stern but composed. Ma'am, I'd like a word with you. Karen crossed her arms defensively, bristling at the implication of wrongdoing. What now? Haven't you done enough already? Ignoring her hostility, Ramirez continued calmly. Your actions today were discriminatory and unfounded. Mr. Carter hasn't violated any laws. He's been contributing positively to the community, yet you chose to target him based on assumptions rooted in prejudice. Karen sputtered indignantly. Prejudice? Are you accusing me of being racist? That's ridiculous. It's not an accusation, Hayes interjected, joining the conversation. It's a fact. You singled him out because of his appearance and background, without considering the truth. That's unacceptable. The weight of their words hit Karen like a freight train. For years, she justified her behavior as protecting the neighborhood, dismissing criticism as jealousy or misunderstanding. But hearing it laid bare, racism, discrimination, prejudice, forced her to confront the ugliness of her actions. Her defenses crumbled slightly, though pride prevented her from fully admitting fault. Even if that's true, she retorted weakly, what about my rights? My property value? Shouldn't I have a say in who hangs around here? Ramirez shook her head, her tone firm but empathetic. Community safety is important, but it doesn't give anyone the right to harass or falsely accuse someone based on stereotypes. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences. A public reckoning. By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered near Karen's driveway, drawn by the escalating confrontation. Some whispered disapprovingly, while others openly expressed support for Jim. One man stepped forward, addressing Karen directly. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he said, his voice tinged with anger. "That man has done more for this country than most of us ever will. Instead of thanking him, you treated him like garbage. That's not who we are, or who we want to be, as a community." Karen recoiled as murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Even her closest allies, the ones who usually indulged her complaints, kept their distance, unwilling to associate with her toxic behavior. Isolated and humiliated, she retreated to her porch, slamming the door behind her. Restoring dignity. Back at the patrol car, Hayes handed Jim a business card with contact information for local veteran support services. "Take this," he urged. "They'll help you find stable housing and employment. And if anyone gives you trouble, call us. We got your back." Jim accepted the card gratefully, clutching it tightly in his hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I haven't felt this hopeful in a long time." Ramirez smiled warmly. "You deserve it, sir. Never forget that." As the officers prepared to leave, Jim paused briefly, glancing toward Karen's house. Despite everything, he harbored no ill will toward her. He understood that fear and ignorance often drove people to act cruelly, and perhaps given time she might come to see the error of her ways. Turning back to the park bench, he retrieved the trash bag he'd left behind earlier. Neighbors offered to help carry it to a nearby dumpster, their gestures small but meaningful. For the first time in ages, Jim felt seen, not as a burden or a threat, but as a person worthy of respect. Foreshadowing change. Before driving away, Officer Hayes made one final announcement to the assembled crowd. "Folks, let's remember what happened here today. A man who served our country was targeted unfairly because of prejudice. Let's use this as an opportunity to reflect on how we treat each other. Compassion costs nothing, but it means everything." The neighbors nodded solemnly, many vowing silently to do better. Some even began organizing plans to host a community event honoring veterans, inspired by Jim's quiet heroism. As the patrol car pulled away, Jim watched it disappear down the road, a renewed sense of purpose swelling within him. Though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. The officer's intervention had sparked something greater, a ripple effect of kindness and accountability that extended far beyond Willow Park. And somewhere inside her house, Karen sat alone, grappling with the realization that her actions had consequences, not just for others, but for herself. Whether she chose to learn from this experience remained to be seen. But for now, justice had prevailed, restoring dignity to a man who had earned it 1,000 times over. The days following the incident in Willow Park marked a turning point for both Jim Carter and Karen Thompson, though their paths couldn't have been more different. For Jim, the encounter with officers Ramirez and Hayes opened doors he had long thought closed, providing access to resources and opportunities that reignited his hope for the future. For Karen, the public shaming and consequences of her prejudiced behavior forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, sparking a fragile but meaningful process of introspection. Jim's new beginning. Armed with the business card Officer Hayes had given him, Jim reached out to the Veteran Support Organization later that week. The staff welcomed him warmly, immediately recognizing the toll years of hardship had taken on his spirit. They listened patiently as he shared his story, not just of military service, but of the struggles that followed: job rejections, strained relationships, and nights spent sleeping under bridges or in shelters. "We're here to help you rebuild," said Marcus, the program coordinator, placing a reassuring hand on Jim's shoulder. "You've already done the hardest part, surviving. Now let us guide you toward thriving." Over the next few weeks, Jim immersed himself in the program's offerings. He attended counseling sessions to address PTSD symptoms that had lingered since his tours overseas. He enrolled in vocational training courses tailored to veterans, learning skills in carpentry and construction, a trade he'd always been curious about but never pursued. Most importantly, he connected with other veterans who understood his experiences, forming friendships that reminded him he wasn't alone. The Housing Assistance Initiative proved transformative as well. Within a month, Jim secured a modest apartment through a subsidized veteran housing program. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom unit with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. But to Jim, it was everything. For the first time in years, he had a place to call home. As he unpacked his belongings, what little he owned, Jim paused to examine the military ID card officers Ramirez and Hayes had returned to him after verifying his identity. Running his fingers over its worn surface, he felt a surge of pride and gratitude. That simple piece of plastic had unlocked not only validation, but also a lifeline to rebuilding his life. Community support. Word of Jim's contributions to Willow Park spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, thanks in part to the officers' decision to highlight his efforts during their investigation. Inspired by his selflessness, residents rallied together to organize a fundraiser aimed at supporting local veterans like him. Flyers plastered on bulletin boards and social media posts invited people to attend a charity barbecue hosted at Willow Park, with all proceeds going toward veteran services. On the day of the event, the park buzzed with activity. Families set up picnic blankets beneath shady trees. Children played games organized by volunteers, and live music filled the air. At the center of it all stood Jim, surrounded by neighbors eager to express their appreciation. "Thank you for what you did," an elderly woman told him, pressing a donation envelope into his hands. "We owe so much to people like you." Jim smiled humbly, overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted. "Just picked up some trash." "That's not how we see it," chimed in a young man holding a toddler. "You reminded us what it means to care about our community. We need more people like you around here." By the end of the day, the fundraiser had raised thousands of dollars, enough to fund several months' worth of programming for veterans in need. But beyond the financial success, the event fostered a renewed sense of unity within Willow Creek. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now exchanged phone numbers and made plans to collaborate on future projects. Even those who hadn't known Jim personally vowed to pay closer attention to marginalized individuals in their midst. "Jim," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "can we talk for a moment?" Jim looked up, surprise flickering across his face. For a brief second, he considered walking away, but something in Karen's demeanor stopped him. There was vulnerability in her eyes, a stark contrast to the hostility he remembered. "What is it?" he asked evenly, setting down his spoon. Karen swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. I owe you an apology. What I did to you was wrong. So wrong. I judged you unfairly, treated you horribly, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Jim studied her for a long moment, searching for sincerity in her expression. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," he said simply, his tone measured but kind. "It takes strength to admit when you're wrong." Relief washed over Karen, though she knew her work was far from over. "Thank you," she murmured, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll keep trying to do better. For everyone." Foreshadowing healing. Though forgiveness didn't erase the pain Karen had caused, it marked the beginning of healing, for both her and the community she had harmed. As winter gave way to spring, signs of renewal emerged throughout Willow Creek. Residents planted flowers in honor of veterans, held monthly cleanup events inspired by Jim's example, and established a scholarship fund for children of military families. For Jim, life continued to improve. With steady employment, stable housing, and newfound friendships, he embraced each day with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, he carried them with pride, reminders of battles fought and survived. And Karen? She still had a long road ahead, but the seeds of change had been planted. Through accountability, education, and action, she hoped to transform not only herself, but also the world around her. Because in the end, redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about learning from them and striving to create a brighter, more compassionate future for everyone. Months had passed since the fateful day in Willow Park when prejudice clashed with compassion, leaving an indelible mark on everyone involved. Spring had arrived, bringing with it new beginnings, not just for nature, but for the people of Willow Creek as well. The once divided neighborhood now thrived under a renewed sense of purpose, united by shared values of empathy, respect, and service to others. For Jim Carter, life had transformed in ways he never thought possible. What began as a simple act of picking up litter had sparked a chain reaction that led to stability, dignity, and acceptance. For Karen Thompson, the journey was far more painful, but equally transformative, as she worked tirelessly to confront her biases and rebuild trust within the community. As the sun rose on a crisp Saturday morning, the stage was set for one final chapter in their intertwined stories, a moment of healing, closure, and hope for the future. A ceremony of gratitude. Willow Park buzzed with anticipation as residents gathered for a special ceremony honoring veterans. The event was organized by a coalition of neighbors, local businesses, and veteran advocacy groups, all inspired by Jim's quiet heroism months earlier. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, reading phrases like "Thank you for your service" and "Community Strong." A podium adorned with an American flag stood at the center of the park, surrounded by rows of chairs filled with eager attendees. Jim sat nervously near the front, dressed in clean slacks and a pressed shirt, a gift from Marcus, the program coordinator who had guided him through his rehabilitation journey. Though grateful for the recognition, he felt unworthy of such praise. "You earned this," Marcus reassured him, patting his shoulder. "Today isn't just about you. It's about reminding everyone what true sacrifice looks like." As the ceremony began, Officer Ramirez stepped up to the podium, her voice carrying warmth and authority. "Good morning, everyone. Today, we gather not only to honor our veterans, but also to celebrate the power of community. We owe so much to those who have served, and to those who continue to serve us daily through acts of kindness and resilience." The crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet as Jim was invited to join Ramirez at the podium. Hesitant at first, he finally made his way forward, greeted by thunderous cheers and heartfelt smiles. "Mr. Jim Carter," Ramirez announced, "is a shining example of courage, humility, and selflessness. Despite facing unimaginable challenges, he chose to give back to this community, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And for that, we are eternally grateful." Tears welled in Jim's eyes as he accepted a plaque commemorating his contributions. When handed the microphone, he took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I never expected any of this. All I did was pick up some trash. But if my little effort inspires even one person to treat others with kindness, or to remember the sacrifices made by our veterans, then it was worth it." His words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement and admiration from the audience. Children waved miniature flags, while adults wiped away tears, moved by the sincerity of his message. Karen's redemption. Seated toward the back of the crowd, Karen watched silently, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and hope. She hadn't planned to attend the ceremony, fearing rejection or judgment, but something inside her, a fragile yet persistent desire to make amends, had compelled her to come. When the program concluded and attendees dispersed to enjoy refreshments, Karen approached Jim cautiously. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small envelope containing a handwritten note. "Jim," she called softly, stepping into his line of sight. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, Jim nodded, inviting her to continue. I wanted to give you this," Karen said, extending the envelope. Inside was a letter expressing her remorse, along with a check donated to the Veteran Scholarship Fund established in Jim's name. "It's not enough, I know that, but I hope it shows how sorry I am, and how much I admire what you've done for this community." Jim accepted the envelope without hesitation, studying her face intently. There was no trace of the hostility he remembered. Instead, he saw vulnerability and genuine regret. After a long pause, he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply, his grip firm but gentle. "Apologies aren't easy. I appreciate yours." Karen exhaled shakily, relief washing over her. "Thank you for forgiving me," she replied, her voice breaking slightly. "I'll keep working to be better for myself, for this community, and for people like you." Though forgiveness didn't erase the past, it marked a pivotal step toward healing. As they parted ways, both carried a renewed sense of possibility, one rooted in accountability and mutual respect. A community united. Following the ceremony, residents lingered in the park, sharing stories and laughter beneath the warm spring sun. Children played games organized by volunteers, while adults exchanged ideas for future initiatives aimed at supporting marginalized groups. The atmosphere was electric with camaraderie, a testament to the bonds forged through adversity. One particularly poignant moment occurred when Officer Hayes addressed the crowd, urging them to carry the lessons of the day forward. "Compassion isn't a one-time act," he reminded them. "It's a commitment to see each other fully, to listen without judgment, and to stand together against injustice. Let's keep building a community where everyone feels valued." His words drew resounding applause, cementing the collective resolve to prioritize inclusivity and kindness moving forward. Jim's new chapter. In the weeks that followed, Jim settled further into his new life, embracing opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. His carpentry skills flourished, earning him steady work with a local contractor specializing in eco-friendly home renovations. He also became a mentor within the Veteran Support Program, offering guidance and encouragement to others navigating similar struggles. On weekends, he returned to Willow Park, not to clean up, but to volunteer at community events. Whether coaching kids during soccer practice or leading workshops on environmental stewardship, Jim found joy in giving back. Each interaction reinforced his belief in the goodness of humanity, even amid hardship. Karen's transformation. Meanwhile, Karen continued her efforts to dismantle the prejudices that had defined her for so long. Volunteering at the shelter remained a cornerstone of her routine, allowing her to connect with individuals whose lives had been shaped by circumstances beyond their control. Through these experiences, she discovered resilience she hadn't known existed, not just in others, but in herself. Her relationships with neighbors gradually improved as well. Though some remained wary, many acknowledged her progress, recognizing that change required time and effort. By summer, Karen found herself invited to block parties and neighborhood meetings once again, a bittersweet reminder of how far she'd come. One evening, as she watered flowers in her garden, Karen paused to reflect on the journey. Mistakes had been made, bridges burned, and scars left behind. Yet she understood now that redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about striving to do better, one day at a time. Closing reflections. As autumn painted Willow Creek in hues of gold and crimson, the community celebrated another milestone, the groundbreaking of a new housing development specifically designed for veterans and low-income families. Funded in part by donations raised during the spring ceremony, the project symbolized unity, resilience, and hope for the future. Standing alongside Jim at the construction site, Karen felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their paths had crossed under painful circumstances, yet they had emerged stronger, individually and collectively. Together, they represented the power of forgiveness, accountability, and second chances. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the evolving landscape, one truth became abundantly clear. True strength lies not in division, but in coming together, in seeing beyond appearances, in honoring sacrifice and fostering understanding. Because in the end, communities thrive not through perfection, but through compassion. And in Willow Creek, that lesson would endure for generations to come.